Syracuse basketball went 0-2 in the Legends Classic this past weekend. Here's what we learned.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day, and we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And folks, on today's show, we are talking about what we learned about Syracuse after the Legends Classic on Thursday and Friday. We're going to talk about how the metrics actually improved for Syracuse, despite them losing both games in the Legends Classic. We're also going to talk about how the defense improved as well from the first three games, which were not very good for the Orange. But we're also going to start off this podcast talking about a huge concern for Syracuse, which is the fact that the three-point shooting, it's just not there right now. Nobody is shooting the ball well from deep for Syracuse, and we're going to dive into that in just a moment. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So Syracuse basketball in the Legends Classic on Thursday and Friday unfortunately dropped both of its games. They were both close losses to two very good teams. Syracuse lost to Texas 70-66. At one point, they had a lead. Actually, multiple points in the second half. They had a lead, but they just could not close the deal. And against Texas Tech the following night on Friday, they lost 79-74. They didn't really lead much at all. They kind of were always just a step behind Texas Tech. But again, they were very competitive. And that's why I'll say later on that I actually feel better after the two losses than I did after the three wins. We'll get to that later on in the podcast, but let's talk about what is not here for Syracuse basketball right now. It just hasn't shown up this season, and that's the three-point shooting. And it is the main culprit as to why Syracuse lost both of these games. If you caught the post-game reaction I had against Texas, I said the main reason Syracuse lost was the free throw shooting. But the free throw shooting corrected itself the next night against Texas Tech. So I was looking at themes for Syracuse and why they lost both. And the one that sticks out is three-point shooting. Let's go over it, okay? Against Texas, Syracuse was 5 of 21 from the three-point line. And against Texas Tech, they were 6 of 21. Combined, that's 11 for 42. That's not very good. That is 26%. So they didn't shoot the ball well in the Legends Classic, but is it just a case of, hey, they were cold for a couple nights? Not necessarily. The entire team is cold right now for the season, okay? This is an alarming trend that we have to be wary of here, and hopefully it can correct itself going forward. Syracuse hasn't gotten hot from deep. Lemoyne, 4 of 22, 18%. Colgate, they were 8 of 23, which is 35%. That's been their best shooting game of the season. 8 of 23, which is 35%. Not exactly the greatest. It's not bad, but not the greatest. And if that's your best shooting output of the season, that's not very good. And Youngstown State, they were 5 of 22, which is 23%. The three-point shots for Syracuse, they're not falling right now. That's the reality. It's been 5 games, and they're not shooting well from deep. And they really haven't in any game this season. So what's the problem? What's the issue? The guys that are expected to shoot the ball well for Syracuse are not shooting the ball well. Coach Adrian Autry said prior to this season that he expects that this team is going to be a good shooting team. And so far, as the stats say, it has not been a good shooting team. It starts with Chris Bell. Let's talk about Chris Bell, okay? Bell last season, why did we hype him up so much heading into this year? Well, he shot 42% from the three-point line last year, which was second in the ACC. He is the team's best shooter, like it or not. But right now, he's not shooting well. 28% through the first 5 games of this season. That's not good. That's not good enough for Chris Bell. It's not good enough really for anyone's standards, let alone Chris Bell, who was 42% last season. And he's missing shots he normally makes in his sleep. I mean, the big one, obviously, was against Texas Tech at the very end of the game where he has a chance to make it a 2-point game with about a minute to go. After making a great defensive play in transition, he misses a wide open corner three. That's a shot that Chris Bell usually makes, but it's just not going in right now. It was a wide open look. I think it was a good shot selection. Not going to complain about that. And he's your team's best shooter. You want him shooting in that scenario, and he didn't knock it down. Now, I know a lot of people are thinking to themselves, well, sit Chris Bell. He's a one-trick pony. Actually, he's not a one-trick pony this season. I want to point this out. He has improved in other aspects of the game, particularly on offense. He's putting the ball down on the floor more. His efficiency from two has gone up so much from last season. And as a result, he is still scoring at an effective rate. He's averaging 15 points per game despite shooting 28% from the three-point line. So he's not a one-trick pony, at least on offense. Does he drive you crazy at times with his defense? Yes. And also his rebounding when he fails to box out a player. Obviously, it's maddening and it makes you upset. But he's not a one-trick pony, at least anymore on offense. But they need Chris Bell to get going. In order for this team to be at least a decent three-point shooting team, they need Chris Bell to be where he was last season, 40% or higher. Right now, he's at 28%. That is a huge issue right now with Syracuse. It is. Now, what are the alternatives besides Chris Bell? I see a ton of people in the comment section saying, we got to sit Chris Bell. That's what we got to do. To that, I say, well, who else on the team is shooting well? Who else on the team can space the floor? Because I'll give you the percentages of the other guys on Syracuse who are supposed to be decent shooters, guys who can shoot the ball from three. And I'll give you their percentages right now. J.J. Starling, he's actually having a good year. He's 31% from the three-point line. Could be better. Could be a lot better, but I guess also could be worse. But that's 31%. Donnie Freeman, we've hyped him up as someone who can score all three levels on the floor. What does that mean? He can score inside, he can score in the mid-range, and he can score from three. He's 20% to start this season. Choppa Moore. We all love Choppa Moore, right? I think we should maybe even start him. Him and J.J. Starling in the backcourt, right? He's shooting 20%. Lucas Taylor, 14%. Jaquan Carlos, 13%. So as much as Chris Bell might drive you insane, they just need him to get out of the funk that he is in from the three-point line. They have to. They need him to. Because how much faith do you have in the other players on this team to shoot the ball well? I guess I'm confident that J.J. Starling can raise his three-point percentage to maybe 35% this season. Are Donnie and Choppa this bad from the three-point line? Probably not. But at this point in the game right now, I don't know if they're necessarily elite shooters just yet. Taylor and Carlos are not going to shoot 14 and 13% for the season, but I don't think they're going to be particularly great either. They need Chris Bell to get out of the funk he is in. That's the reality. And the only way you do that is you got to play him. You got to keep playing him and just hope that he can shoot the ball well from deep going forward. So that's the major issue right now with Syracuse. They are not shooting the ball well from three. The guys who are supposed to shoot well from three are not. Eddie Lampkin actually has the highest three-point percentage at 1-for-1. That's the issue. They're not shooting the ball well from deep. And who knows? They win at least one of the two games if they shoot the ball decent from deep. That's the reality. So, Syracuse basketball went 0-2 this weekend in the Legends Classic. They were close. They were very competitive against two very good teams. But the common theme between those two teams is that the three-point ball, it wasn't falling, and it hasn't been falling this season. And they need Chris Bell to shoot a lot better than 28%. Otherwise, this team isn't going anywhere. Okay? Three-point shooting right now isn't there. Hopefully it can eventually even itself out in a positive way, positive regression. So that's it for the 3-point shooting. Now coming up, let's talk about the defense, which I think took a step up in these last 2 games compared to the first 3. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Now, Syracuse football, they did not cover against UConn as a 10.5-point favorite. Against Miami, the early line is out, and they are now a 10.5-point underdog at home this Saturday. We're talking about Syracuse football, of course. Big game on Saturday against the Miami Hurricanes. They are a double-digit underdog at home. What do you think of those odds? Well, you can be the judge at FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. This is Locked On Syracuse, and I'm Jackson Holzer, and we are breaking down Syracuse basketball's main takeaways from the Legends Classic. They lost both games, unfortunately, but they were very competitive against 2 quality opponents. And later on in the podcast, I'm going to tell you guys that the metrics actually improved for Syracuse. But first, we are going to go over another improvement for Syracuse, and that is their defense. I think that it took a significant step forward this weekend compared to the first 3 games. What do you guys think? Leave a comment in the comment section below. Do you think that the defense got significantly better these past 2 games than in the first 3? In the first 3 games, I'll be honest with you, I legitimately thought that Syracuse would give up maybe 90 or 100 points against Texas, and that JT Toppin might score 40 for Texas Tech. After the first 3 games of this season, they couldn't defend anyone. They were having trouble staying in front of guys from Lemoyne and Colgate and Youngstown State. How are they going to do against better competition? Well, there was a tactical thing that did occur, and it was mainly in the Texas game. See, when they played Texas on Thursday, the game started out as a bloodbath. Okay, right from the get-go, it looked like it was going to be a blowout. Texas starts the game on a 9-0 run, and Adrian Autry calls timeout for Syracuse. They didn't start the game on time. Following the timeout, he did deploy a bit of the zone. He did play 2-3 zone, which it kind of threw off Texas for a bit. Trey Johnson, also the star freshman for Texas, a guy who's probably going to be a lottery pick in the NBA draft this season. He also finally got cold, which obviously helped Syracuse. But Adrian Autry did make a little bit of an adjustment playing the zone. I think going forward, the best strategy is to do a mix of both, man-to-man and zone in the same game. The reason why is because you never want to lock yourself into one strategy. I just don't think it's a good idea. If man-to-man is not working, don't play it. If zone isn't working, don't play it. Plus, when you're constantly switching defenses, you're forcing the opponent to make adjustments as well. So I liked Adrian Autry's idea of going back and forth between the 2-3 zone and man-to-man against Texas. And it worked. It worked for a large part. Texas did not have the greatest shooting day in the world. Trey Johnson was cold. They had a good performance against Texas. Against Texas Tech, if memory serves correctly, and it hasn't been that long, Syracuse played mostly man-to-man. But the difference is that they were a lot crisper with their defensive rotations, and they did a nice job of staying in front of their man, which was a huge issue in the first 3 games. They couldn't stand in front of anyone. Constant blow-bys. Didn't really notice as much this weekend. Texas Tech, they shot 43% from the field. The issue really against Texas Tech was that they weren't creating turnovers on defense. Texas Tech had 3 turnovers for the entire game. If you don't create turnovers, you don't get any steals, you don't force a bad pass, it's hard to win. And credit to Texas Tech, they only committed 3 turnovers. I think we learned a lot about 2 players in particular on defense. Jyare Davis, the Delaware transfer this offseason, The guy is a bull. Jay Williams on the broadcast against Texas Tech said he's built like a linebacker. He's not wrong. I absolutely love his defense, particularly down low, because he can handle pretty much anyone. If you can handle the big guys from Texas Tech and Texas, I have faith that he can also handle going up against top tier ACC teams. Or we'll get to later on, Maryland and Tennessee coming up. I really like Jyare Davis. There was a couple of moments against Texas Tech that I singled out where he did a great job defending JT Toppin. JT Toppin is one of the best players in the country. He's on Texas Tech. He is a nightmare down low. He can play bully ball. But Jyare Davis did a great job of staying in front of him and forcing him to take contested shots. I thought Peter M did the same thing, except it seemed like they were hunting Peter M a lot more than they were Jyare Davis. But we talked about Peter M in the last podcast. He provides energy and effort. We already know that. But Jyare Davis on defense, I thought was really good this past weekend. Lucas Taylor as well. I like Lucas Taylor. Georgia State transfer. I told you last segment he's not shooting the ball well. He was someone coming into the season that I thought could provide a little bit of a spark shooting. He was 35% from three last year at Georgia State, 40% at Wake Forest the year before, albeit in a limited number of attempts, but still, it's a good number for a limited number. But his defense was noticeable. And there was a reason why he was playing a lot down the stretch, particularly against Texas. Coach Adrian Autry was playing the wheels off of him. He got in the head of Texas's Trey Johnson at one point in the second half, which I don't mind at all, playing tough physical defense on him. But that's the thing that stands out. He's physical and he's athletic. He may not be the greatest player in the world, but I like his defense. And I think going forward, when Syracuse is in situations where they need stops, guys like Jyare Davis and Lucas Taylor have got to be on the floor for Syracuse going forward. Overall, I think we should be encouraged about the defensive improvement that Syracuse made. I'm not going to sit here and say that I think now Syracuse is going to be a great defensive team. Okay, I'm not going to sit here and say that. But what I will tell you is that watching the games this weekend against Texas and Texas Tech, two very good opponents, two teams that can definitely score. They have some great players. The fact that Syracuse was able to do well defensively it doesn't get rid of all the concerns on defense from the first three games, but it makes me start to think, okay, maybe those first three games were more of an aberration than we thought. Maybe they just were not playing well. They were not playing to their capability. Whereas these two games, they were playing their best on defense. That's what I think. So, Syracuse's three-point shooting isn't there, but at least the defense has improved over the course of the season. Now, coming up, let's talk about how the metrics actually liked Syracuse this weekend and why you should feel good about the losses despite them actually being losses. That's coming up next. Basketball season is in full swing, and whether it's NBA, college, Syracuse basketball, you know that going to basketball games is always exciting. Guys, for Syracuse basketball, it's like it doesn't matter who they play. They're always going to keep it close. Either it could be the worst team in the country, it can be the best team in the country, but it's still going to find a way to be like a one-possession game at the end. If you want to catch an exciting Syracuse basketball game, the way I suggest you getting tickets is by using Gametime. Gametime is a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. My favorite feature is the curated deals. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app. Create an account. Use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege. LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. This is Locked On Syracuse, and I'm Jackson Holzer. We are going over the main takeaways for Syracuse basketball in the Legends Classic on Thursday and Friday. Unfortunately, they lost both games they played in to Texas and Texas Tech, but they were both very tight games. Syracuse at least while they couldn't get the win, should be at least proud of the effort that they showed, okay? They showed a good fight, but they ultimately could not come out on top. And honestly, I don't know whether you agree with me or disagree with me on this. So leave a comment in the comment section below after I say it. I actually feel better about these losses than I do about the wins. Genuinely, because Syracuse basketball played so much better against the better competition than they did in the first 3 games against inferior competition. If Syracuse plays like that from this weekend, if they play like they did against Texas and they play like they did against Texas Tech, they are going to annihilate Cornell on Wednesday. They're going to crush them. And they would have crushed their first 3 opponents this season like they were supposed to if they play like they did this past weekend. It goes back to what I said after the Texas Tech game, but now I actually have advanced metrics for you that prove my point. After each win that Syracuse has had this season, the Orange have fallen in KenPom. Think about that. They have fallen after each of their wins because they're not impressive at all. But after both of their losses, Syracuse basketball has actually gone up in KenPom. They started the weekend at 100 overall, they started the weekend at 107 overall in the country. But after their games against Texas and Texas Tech, they are up to an even 100. So they moved up 7 spots in KenPom after 2 losses. Which means, I know it's kind of kooky, but that is the nature of college sports. Style points matter. Schedules matter. Who you play matters. How you win matters. Who you beat matters. Who you lose to matters. How you lose matters. It all gets factored in, and the reason why it has to be factored in is because come the NCAA tournament in March, and when they're selecting, they might have 5 or 6 spots that are available, and there are about 20 teams that could make a case for it, all with very similar records. So they have to take these things into account. Okay? Having said that, if we want to talk about the NCAA tournament, at this point for Syracuse basketball, if you look at their out-of-conference schedule for the rest of the season, they still have 2 chances to get a signature non-conference win, which I think they're going to need to do to make the NCAA tournament, okay? They have at Tennessee on December 3rd. That is a true road game at Tennessee. How about that one, okay? Tennessee's very, very good. That's a tough one. That would be a nice win. How about that? Then you also got Maryland. Neutral site. Once again, you're in Brooklyn again. That's on December 21st. Of those 2 games, at Tennessee, neutral site against Maryland, I believe that Syracuse basketball is going to have to win one of those games to make the NCAA tournament. In theory, they could still make the tournament if they lose both, but they would just be making their lives a whole lot harder in ACC play coming up. So in my opinion, they got to win one of those 2 games, and I'm going to give you my reasoning right now for it, okay? Let's go back to last season. Syracuse basketball had the same record in conference, okay? These 2 teams both went 11-9 last year in the ACC. Syracuse, of course, missed the NCAA tournament. The other team with the same conference record at 11-9, they were a 6th seed in March Madness. Think about that for a second. One team, they both have the same conference record, 11-9. One team is a 6th seed in March Madness. The other is completely left out. Why is that the case? First of all, the other team that I'm talking about is Clemson. Clemson was the 6th seed last year that went 11-9 in conference play, the same record as Syracuse. Why were they a 6th seed, you may ask, and why was Syracuse left out? Well, here's the answer. Clemson had 2 signature wins out of conference. They won at Alabama last season, the team that eventually knocked them out of the NCAA tournament. But they beat them in the regular season on their home floor. Hint, hint, Syracuse, you might want to win at Tennessee because it would have a very similar effect. They won at Bama last year. They also, at home, beat a very good South Carolina team. And that, my friends, is why they were a 6. That's it. Plain and simple. They won those 2 out-of-conference games. Now, sure, there was more that they did, right? They should have won at Duke as well last season, but they had a very narrow loss at Duke. That's obviously a signature conference win or signature conference game. But the point being is that they had signature non-conference wins. Last season, when you look at Syracuse, what did they do in non-conference? It's not that they had a bad record. They were good in the non-con, but they got blown out by Tennessee in Maui, and they also got blown out by Gonzaga in Maui. Yes, they beat Oregon by 20 points last season, but if I remember correctly, Oregon was a team that stole a bid last season to the tournament by winning the then Pac-12, which I think the Pac-12 still exists, but they need more teams. You get the idea, though. You need a signature non-conference win if you're Syracuse in order to make the NCAA tournament in all likelihood, unless you want to go 14-6 in the ACC, which is what it might take if you don't win one of those games. Syracuse basketball is going to have to beat Tennessee or Maryland. Otherwise, they're going to be making their lives a whole lot harder in conference play. They're going to have to be one of the top teams in the conference. Plain and simple. That's what it is. So, the metrics improved. They moved up in KenPom by 7 spots despite 2 losses. They were very competitive. Obviously, now the next step is they're going to have to beat one of these teams in order to achieve the goal of making the NCAA tournament. I'm not going to make game predictions yet for those games because we're still a little bit away from them, but that's the reality. They have to beat either Tennessee or Maryland. As far as what is coming up on the podcast in the future, tomorrow is going to be a mini podcast, okay? Mini podcast tomorrow, Syracuse football recruiting update, because Syracuse football may or may not have landed a prediction to land a 4-star defensive back in the class of 2025. We'll talk about that tomorrow, okay? That's coming up. As far as what else, if Syracuse basketball is ranked in the AP Top 25, which by this point, when you're watching, the rankings will be out. Perhaps I'll make a little podcast about that one as well. Can't guarantee you that. Tuesday, we're going to go Syracuse-Miami talk. Wednesday, Syracuse and Cornell postgame. Thursday is Thanksgiving, but I imagine I'll still do something for that. I also do want to do a crossover episode with Alex Stano, the host of Locked On Canes. So be on the lookout for that as well coming up. Thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen today. And for your second listen, check out the Locked On ACC podcast, Alex Stano and Kenton Gibbs. Normally it's Alex Stano, but this is where I promote myself a little bit. I'm actually going to be filling in for Alex Stano on Locked On ACC for the next couple of days. So it'll be myself and Kenton Gibbs. That's right. Keeping it real, bringing you the truth about the ACC and where your team stands within the conference. This is where I got to take off my orange-colored glasses and look at everything objectively. You can catch my thoughts on the Locked On ACC podcast tonight and tomorrow. You can find Locked On ACC on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Folks, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this video, click that like button. If you really liked it, subscribe to the channel. Turn on those notifications so you know right away when I am dropping the next podcast. And everyone, take care.